Glad you decided to be here this afternoon. I hope you're enjoying the conference. I know I always enjoy coming to this particular conference. Today's topic that I'm going to be presenting on is epidemic in our youth culture, bullying, violence, HIV, AIDS, and suicide, how to provide trauma-sensitive services. That's a big, broad topic. So let me just put it out there first for you that you have received a copy of the slides. There's a lot of information in the slides. My style of presentation as an educator is to give you a lot of information and then kind of shift through it as we go along as to what specifically you may need. So I like to be kind of interactive, and I'll periodically check with you and see if this information is relevant to what you're looking for, and hopefully we'll have some questions and answers. In a 1-hour presentation, you're not going to get that much, so that's why there's more slide information in your handouts that I'm actually going to be covering today. So at some point, I'm just going to kind of move through it. The slides are important, but not important enough to spend a lot of time on them. I want to get to the end when we talk about some of the interventions we can do, okay? So I hope everybody can appreciate that. So where are we at today when we start talking about the epidemics that our youth are going through? We do know we've seen an increase in youth suicide, particularly with LGBT identified youth. The Tyler Clemente incident happened on the campus that I work on. That's the Rutgers University. I'm part of that school system. And in New Jersey, we have done a lot of work around preventing bullying. However, it's still not stopping youth from killing themselves. It's not a unique situation to New Jersey. Up in New England, there was another youth just last month took his own life. And I heard as of, I think it was yesterday, there was another youth who was also committed suicide because he was being bullied because he was gay. I don't recall the details for what state he was in. So let me just give you some basics around LGBT terminology so I can kind of get into the heart of the presentation. First thing I want to acknowledge is that one size does not fit all. I'm going to be up here sharing with you my own experience working within this community and also being a member of the community. But I cannot speak for and represent the entire community. There are many terms that are used within the community besides lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Queer is one that we're hearing many more young people referring, self-identifying as being queer. It's a term that from my generation was not considered a positive term, so it's something I had to get used to. And I would probably suggest that if you're not part of the community, you can also be rather selective in using it. However, it may be appropriate and at times understood by the youth when that term is being used. What I hear from some young people who identify as queer, it doesn't always pertain to their sexual behavior. And that for many of us is something that we relate to because the act is not the orientation. But some individuals might identify as queer by their association with friends and also by just their own belief systems about being outside or on the fringes of what society or culture may perceive as being mainstream. MSM, WSW, I think you're probably familiar with that, but that's really more of our researchers have identified that term. Male to female, female to male, gender variance, two-spirited, genderqueer, same-gender loving, heteroflexible, bi-curious, all different terms used by the community. We have a full day presentation that we offer on working and providing services to LGBT individuals. I'm just kind of giving you some highlights from it. But more importantly, and as it's been discussed in other workshops, for the populations that we're working with, the terms they use can be so totally different than what we use and what their understanding may be. One of the most common phrases I hear, particularly if I work with people who have been incarcerated, is either gay for the pay or gay for the stay. Gay for the pay, if you're on the streets and you take money or drugs from someone and you're willing to engage in some form of sexual activity, it does not mean that you're gay. And for many individuals, they definitely are not gay identified. However, they will engage in high-risk behavior or higher-risk behavior with same-sex partners. And again, that gay for the pay, and coming from justice-involved individuals who have been incarcerated, it is often something that's also used as a defense mechanism, or when I say defense, more of a protective factor. If a rumor goes around the prison that you've turned tricks, then you can be easily marked. However, if you make sure you can confirm your masculinity by saying it was only gay for the pay, that seems to help a little bit. Gay for the stay is interesting because I hear that more in female correctional facilities where some of the women identify and relate to each other and will actually create very emotionally connective and also sexually involved relationships with each other while in the prison. They may have contact with each other outside of the facility, but on the street, they do not want it known that they are gay or lesbian or bisexual. So there's that straight acting, straight on the streets, clean in the sheets, but then also some other terms which are used, and why some may be perceived as being offensive, there are some members of the community that actually embrace this term and as they see themselves. One of the newest terms, I mean, homothug is something that I use many times referring to men of color who are in the lifestyle, but the Barbie boys are very effeminate young men who very proudly now I hear claiming this as their identity, being a Barbie boy. So that was kind of like an educational piece for me. But bringing it back to the topic, because I'm going to talk a little bit about hate and bias crimes. And I recommend the Stop the Hate training manual. You can just Google that, and I have at the end of the presentation, it's also a resource list that helps you to find some of this material. But a hate or a bias crime is a range of behaviors, threats, degrading languages, violence, assaults that occur. And they occur primarily against the person because it is motivated in whole or in part by how the other person is perceived, be it identified by their race, religion, disability status, ethnicity, national origin, gender, or sexual orientation. And it's important to recognize that it's as they are perceived by others, because some people may not be. Yet if someone does perceive them as, that can also be considered a bias crime if that's what motivates the assault on them. The risk factors and for being targeted by bullies and the consequences of bullying behavior, we're going to cover this kind of briefly. Again, I think it's important information, but I don't want to spend too much time on it, so I'm going to go through these slides a little quicker than I normally speak. We know that children that are youth will typically feel anxious and insecure. They can be very cautious, suffer from low self-esteem. They rarely defend themselves or retaliate when confronted by students who bully them. If they do, then many times the bullying may stop. Not always, but depending on how much that youth is empowered to take a stand for themselves. And I'm not talking about being physically aggressive with someone, but when they're able as a young person to show that level of competence, it increases their protective factors. One of the things, unfortunately for many of these youth, they lack a lot of the social skills. They tend to be rather withdrawn, isolated children who like to be off by themselves. Therefore, they're more prone to be bullied or attacked, which can also then affect their concentration in school, leading to some actually avoiding school. The longer the bullying continues, the more it can affect the individual's self-esteem and feeling of self-worth. And then it also increases that social isolation. So you have a youth who does not feel as connected to his peers. They're being bullied, and so the effect of the bullying is not only the violence and the trauma that they're experiencing, but also it's going to further increase their isolation. And even after bullying has stopped, many individuals who sustain bullying in their youth can have higher levels of depression, poor self-esteem than other adults. So there are long-term consequences. Going back to their basic understanding, males who are bullies tend to be physically weaker than their peers. I want to talk a little bit about bullies to kind of keep this also in perspective. Many people believe that bullies act tough in order to hide their feelings of insecurity. That is not true. Bullies are actually very confident. It's why they're able to get away with what they do. It's what empowers them, because bullying, like any other act of violence, is about power and control. So they're exercising their power and their control and their influences others inappropriately with their bullying behavior, but they definitely do have confidence in order to do that. I'm not saying there might not be a core of some vulnerability, because I think every human being has some level of a vulnerability inside them, but for bullies, that's not their strongest motivator. They have a strong need, though, to dominate others and usually have little empathy for their targets. When we work with bullies, it's one of the hardest groups as far as helping them to develop empathy. And the reason why I cover some of this information about bullies is many people coming into our services are not only victims, we also have perpetrators themselves coming in, people who have bullied others or attacked or assaulted others, or have victimized others either verbally and or physically. We often saw the physical aggression that was exhibited by males was more atypical, and that females we often considered, well, they're assaults are usually more verbal. However, we know that has changed. There are many females who are actively, aggressively, physically assaulting other youth. Not just girl on girl, but also girl on boy assaults have occurred. So we're seeing a lot more of the reality of what's actually challenging some of our earlier perceptions around bullying. We do know that also bullies tend to get in trouble more often. They do poorer in school, and they're also more likely to fight, drink, and smoke than their peers, and particularly beginning at a younger age. So they may be some of the ones that we're seeing in our substance abuse programs earlier on. Two dynamics occur in the home. There's usually little emotional support, failure to monitor activities, or have little involvement in their life, therefore at greater risk for increasing bullying behavior. And also the parent's discipline style. Extremely permissive, or the opposite end, extremely harsh approach to discipline can increase the teenage bullying. So when it's very permissive, the youth often feel they can do whatever they want. If it's too harsh and it feels so restrictive, it's actually teaching someone, because sometimes along with that harshness might also be some parental abuse perpetrated on youth, and violence begots violence. So that might explain why some individuals will perpetrate violence outside the home because they learned it in the home. Bullies have little difficulty making friends because their friends typically share their pro-violence behavior. Not everyone who engages in bullying behavior, most individuals who engage in bullying behavior do not act alone. One of the things a bully often needs, though, is needs to have an audience. They need to have someone to witness the abuse, because that's what gives them their power. Remember, it's about, just like around sexual violence and domestic violence, it's about power and control. And in this scenario, where domestic violence may happen in a more isolated, within the home, and it might be behind closed doors, bullying is something that happens more often in public. Maybe not in view of everyone, but definitely bullies need to have an audience. They need to have someone who's observing them, and that kind of inflates, again, their ego about how powerful and how controlled they are of the situation. They have many friends that will follow them. Bullies are often the leaders. And when I say the leaders, we can see sometimes the bullies that come into treatment are also the ones that are going to kind of lead the group in a lot of dynamics that happen, because they're the most outspoken ones in the group. If they're not happy with services, they're going to let you know it, and they're going to make sure when they're letting you know it, they get everybody else kind of riled up into being dissatisfied. There also is a strong relationships between bullying and other later legal and criminal problems as an adult. So the bullies tend to maintain these behaviors well into adulthood. Okay, so that's kind of the brief. Cover that quickly, as I said I would, about bullying, just to give you the dynamics of bullying and assault. I want to talk now specifically around sexual orientation and gender identity issues. You know, for far too often we've excused behavior with the old, boys will be boys. When we see one person picking on another person. This is not. And we can no longer say that that's innocent, because that's what leads to this. And in some of those individuals, the perpetrators were not just individual bullies, they were institutional bullies. There were medical centers that refused to treat someone. There were EMTs who laughed when they cut away someone's clothing because they noticed that individual, she still had some male genitalia, and they thought that was funny. And that delayed her care. For some of the individuals, what forensics referred to as overkill, the level of anger and aggression that was used in those crimes, multiple injuries that were, again, any of those injuries could have killed someone, but it just talks to me about the anger and aggression that is projected on someone. And I then, as someone who works in violence prevention, try to look at, so what is underneath that? Where does that come from? How does someone get to that point where that seems to be what they see as an appropriate action when they are offended by as someone is presenting themselves? What makes a 15-year-old boy get offended because a 14-year-old boy wears a dress to school? Why does that offend them to the point? Now, of course, in that story, it was also speculated that the one boy sent the other boy a Valentine. But people in classrooms sell Valentines to many different students. I don't know if it was just why that, but, why not say, hey, I don't want your Valentine. You could rip it up, you could throw it away, you could ignore it. There's many things you can do besides bringing a gun and shooting someone in the head point blank range. So what brings someone to that point? Zakiya Gunn from Newark, New Jersey, again, where I'm from, I work in the North Campus also, could just be out at a bus stop. She was out with her girlfriends, 4 young black women out on a night on the town, having fun, took the bus home from New York. I'm sorry, the PATH train home from New York, was waiting for the local bus, and a group of men approached them and started making lewd, suggestive comments. And all she said was, guys, we're really not interested. I mean, really, we're not interested. I'm a lesbian. Just, like, back off. As a way, again, not in your face, just you're really making, no one really wants to see what you have because, you can grab it all you want. We're just not interested. And she was stabbed to death. 15 years old. Just at the beginning of her life. Any other comments or questions? The reality is that 90% of our LGBT teens report feeling victimized right in their own school system. And this is versus 62% of those non-LGBT identified youth. If you want information about school bullying as it takes place, I recommend GLSEN. That's the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. They have a report they put out every 2 years. So we're now they're working on compiling the data and will be released in 2011. The recent data, but nearly 2/3 of LGBT youth felt unsafe in school because of their sexual orientation. And many times it's as other people perceive them. Not all those kids identified as being gay and lesbian. Some of those kids really weren't sure, but others perceived them as that. So I don't want to focus on the research that we have here from GLSEN, but I think it's very important to look at this statistic when you have time. I also do some educational training for educators within their school system. And we help them to see what they can do to help prevent that. Because the number one thing we hear kids still saying is that's so gay. And there are many teachers that just consider it harmless or don't know how to respond to that. And I'm sure some of you have probably heard it in your own life, in your own experience, when someone sees somebody else says it. And again, what do? How can we prevent that from continuing to be used against people in an offensive manner? Saying it, I'll be honest, as a gay man, sometimes my friends say, because there are certain things in my community that might really be very, very gay, But hearing it from an outsider, hearing it from somebody else, and hearing it with the intent that it's meant, and many times by young people who don't fully even understand the concept of what it means to be either gay, lesbian, or bisexual, but they just know that it's a put down, and it's also considered a rather graphic. It can really insult someone to their core. The other way we see bullying going on is on the internet. And again, just to give you some little background on this, we see, because I'm connecting suicide and internet, people are using the internet as a way to encourage others to commit suicide. There was actually a case that was prosecuted in the UK. An adult male was impersonating a teenage girl, telling people in an internet chat room that she was feeling suicidal, didn't have any friends, wanted to take her own life. Other young girls started to talk to her, who actually were young girls. She, over a period of time, manipulated them to making a suicide pact and said, why don't we actually do it together? We can set up our cams and we can watch each other and be there for each other. She used a video loop of someone else committing a suicide. It was, remember, this is a middle-aged man in the UK is talking to a young woman in another country and pretending to be 14 years old, pretending to take her own life, shows a video clip of a young girl swallowing pills, laying down, lighting a candle, doing whatever she, and it wasn't until the mother, because the police had no leads in this, the mother started talking to another mother whose teenage daughter also committed suicide and said it seemed that the more emails my daughter got from, I'm going to say Jennifer, this girl Jennifer really seemed to upset my daughter a lot, and then they became like really best friends. And the other woman said, I know, and it was so sad because last year Jennifer killed herself. And the other mother said, no, Jennifer killed herself the same day my daughter killed herself. That was 2 years ago. And the two mothers are comparing their stories, saying, no, wait a minute, Jennifer talked to my daughter. And they found other mothers who said they found the same email contact and were able to bring it to the police to act. And to me, we think, I know that my young nieces and nephews have learned to use the internet, and hopefully they're using it safely. But to think that people can use this to that, some people get very alarmed about sexting, and I'm not here to kind of talk about that. But and yes, if you show your genitals on, use your cell phone, take pictures of your genitals and send it to somebody else, you have no idea where that picture is going to go. But then you hear this kind of a story, and we have to look at what we can do as far as preventing this kind of harm from occurring. We hear more about the sexting, what needs to be done to stop it, which is, I think, sometimes for young people, it just adds to that whole confusion about their sexuality and how they should treasure it or treat it, or how to utilize it. But there's so many other levels. The name of that group is altsuicide.holiday, and they're still in existence. You can actually find them on Facebook if you want some information. And I just checked it this morning while I was sitting there to make sure that the information is current that I'm giving you. And there are still people sharing ideas about how is the best way to commit suicide. But stepping back from that, there's other forms of cyberbullying, cyberstalking, and cyber threats that take place. Flaming. The other thing that we're hearing more about is the happy slapping. What used to be referred to as a smackdown on the street, now people are making sure they videotape it. So as a way to further humiliate or embarrass their victim, not only are they assaulting them, slapping them, sucker punching them, but they're making sure other people videotape it, and then that's constantly replayed as a way to harass someone. Now, in New Jersey, we have very comprehensive laws around bullying. In fact, we are considered one of the model states. And I just highlighted two of the areas. Our law, it's many different pages. I just kind of excerpt these two areas because it talks about including affectional or sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. And this is whether it's actual or perceived. That's part of our protective categories. And then also including HIV-related illnesses, which includes someone who might be perceived as being HIV positive. The other area I want to talk about is the bullying that occurs in institutions. These are pictures from the websites that I go to. The first one is Reverend Fred Phelps, Battleboro Baptist Church. The Baptist Church says he is not part of our larger network of Baptist churches. He's actually a renegade or an offshoot. However, he still lists himself and is still considered a church by the federal government as tax exemption status. Most of his church members are also family members. They boycott and picket funerals of gay people, people with HIV who have died, and also now military personnel who have died. What many people don't know is that they were also very closely associated with the Family Research Council, which is housed here in the DC area. Just to give you a sampling of what, now I show some of these. These are many different pamphlets that you can order through sites or made available online if you're looking for the Family Research Council. Now, the reason why I also put this out there is many times parents, friends, family members, or even young people themselves are looking for information. They type in a keyword gay on a Google search, and they might get to this particular website. Or a parent may type that in, looking for help. Let's say they put in a Google search for help my gay daughter, or I think my child might be gay, and you'll find sites as this. You don't have to be gay. Diminish your unwanted homosexuality. Develop your heterosexual potential. We see two of their ads. How do I help my friend who says she's a lesbian? My son says he's gay. What can I do? And there's two books. Now, this appears to be written by a psychologist. Actually, I believe his credentials have been suspended. I know he's been under ethics reviews several times. However, because he can also work within a church or a faith-based program, he can still practice because he's doing what's considered pastoral care as opposed to psychological care. So you have two books here, A Parent's Guide to Preventing Homosexuality and Reparative Therapy for Male Homosexuals. This is more institutional bullying. This may seem extreme to some, but this is falling into the hands of many. And we have many young people who are sent away to reparative institutions to have their sexual orientation change. I want you to think about perspectives around stereotypes. We all hear stereotypes. Sometimes we hear comics make references to stereotypes. Sometimes they're said with good-naturedly, with intent, or something that we might laugh at. They can actually sometimes be positive. Some are usually negative. They're often based on what we perceive to be an impression of a segment or a population. But many times stereotypes will also foster in a prejudice, where those beliefs become held much stronger. And then that's usually combined with prejudice and fear or hatred. So we have a stereotype that someone may laugh at. And again, I get the joke. But the reality is there are some people who believe that and reinforce it. There are others that say it's not always like that. But just kind of connect from stereotypes to prejudice, moving on to discrimination. We recognize discrimination generally when we see it as it's blatant and people are aware that it's happening, but it can begin with a range of negative experiences such as stereotype and prejudices, and moving on to another form, which is where it's actually used as oppression, a way to hold someone back. Oppression for some segments of our communities. I owe a debt of gratitude to the women's movement for teaching me about oppression around male privilege. I owe a debt of gratitude to the civil rights movements. And I'm from a generation, I was born in the 50s, grew up in the 60s, and I remember when we had racial riots in our towns, in our areas. That's just part of my history. I wasn't a part of it, I was a young child, but I remember hearing what other people said about it. And I'm also grateful that my parents gave me a different perspective on it. I remember the first time I, as a family member, took a vacation with my parents down south. I was we stopped somewhere, and I think it was in Maryland, to be honest with you. I remember we stopped somewhere when my father gave us money to go in and get sodas, probably $1 to get probably 4 sodas, right? That tells you how long ago that was. But I remember waiting in line, and there was a black woman, as I referred to at the time, as a child, that's my understanding. This black woman was standing ahead of me, and the waitress came over and said to me, "What can I get you, hon?" I said, "Oh no, this woman was ahead of me." And the waitress said, "She'll wait her turn." I, as a child, didn't understand that. I'm like, well, it is her turn. She's next. She's in front of me, you know. And the African-American woman just said, "It's okay, honey, go ahead." She knew what I was trying to say, but she was also, because she understood racism as it was alive and well in the 60s. But we see an interconnection from sexism, racism, ageism, anti-Semitism, classism, transphobia, heterosexism, and the other isms that we have. Not everyone understands the classism, the transphobia, the heterosexism. I want to talk about that a little bit more. We see Chaz Bono here. He's doing an awful lot right now just by his presence, just by being who he is and sharing his story with others. I'm not talking about just being on Dancing with the Star, but just that he's being open about his own transitioning and his own identification as becoming a male, becoming Chaz. There's other stigmas that take place that are specific to some of our subpopulations and our more vulnerable populations, particularly among men of color, MSM, who face stigma in every aspect of their life. The J.L. King book was brought to fame by Oprah, basically, but it also created a lot of misunderstanding around men who might partner with other men and what that meant for them. But as we say there's a misunderstanding, it is still very much alive and present. Bishop Eddie Long. I don't know if you've seen both these pictures. This picture, you can see who the guests were. Okay? And with all respect, this is Coretta Scott King's funeral, and Bishop Eddie Long gave the eulogy. Very well-respected religious leader in his community. He was also charged by 5 young men with sexually assaulting them or sexually molesting them when they were teenagers. It did not go to court because it was settled out of court because of a financial arrangement was made. Since the financial arrangement was made, those men, they cannot make comments on it. One man has already forfeited receiving the financial award because he, although he I believe he says his lawyers convinced him it was the right thing to do to take the money, he felt he needed to tell his story more. So he is still speaking out about it was not by choice. But anyway, this is Bishop Long's profile picture on a gay hookup site. I'm even going to give credit to which site it is. Okay, but many people that know him in this outfit don't recognize him in this outfit. I just kind of use this slide for, again, not to, well, maybe it does embarrass him, I don't know. The point is, we have a man of influence, a man of power, and he says things against gay people, and he himself is living that dual life, that dual lie. So the issue of down low, this is the quote specifically from CDC about gay and bisexual men. And as we all know, that all individuals need to take responsibility for their behavior and ways to protect themselves. But we do know that for some members of our community, it's going to be much more difficult. Many African American Latino men are more likely to identify as heterosexual than their white counterparts. They often face racial discrimination from society as a whole, homophobia within their own ethnic groups, and they often feel unaccepted in the mainstream gay community. And they face racial discrimination from society at large. So in the healthcare office, we may not ask people about their behavior and about their association, because if we often see them as coming in, and I use this slide as the man who comes in and talks about having a girlfriend, so we may not be asking him appropriately about his other relationships, his other intimate relationships, his other emotional relationships, his other social relationships. And we need to be able to ask those questions. We need to be able to ask them with respect, but we also need to be able to have our own confidence in knowing that we need to ask those questions. It's okay to ask someone, are you currently sexually active? And if you are sexually active, are you active with men, women, or both? No shame, no judgment, it's just a question. And there are many men of color who are living very out and openly. In fact, there's a larger subculture of gay men who are really working within the community itself as far as being more visible. If you're not familiar, in New York, we have the Gay Men's Health Crisis, and they have the House of Latex. This is one of the longest house parties that we have. People familiar with the house scene? People heard that term before? House parties are kind of like drag balls, okay? People dress up, put out, get dressed. These are and they do a walk. They do a runway walk. So this might be fierceness, and this might be butch drag, okay? So these are people that are out there as part, they're parties that originated for youth, by youth. It's young people getting together, listening to music, dancing, and having fun. And what we saw was, and what we learned, that at some of these events, there was a widespread use of drugs going on. Not always alcohol. Other drugs were being used because some of these were all-night events. So the Gay Men's Health Crisis created the house. Usually, the house parties are sponsored by a house. There'd be the House of Chanel, the House of Coco, the House of whatever, and these are the different. The House of Renaissance. I'm thinking of some of the more popular names. So they created the House of Latex, where their educators go into the house ball and promote safer sex activity and arrange to have balls and house parties that are specifically there to promote safer sex behavior. The other term I want to add is the same gender loving, which is something that we see being used. It's kind of like becoming more understood, particularly in the African American community. It was first used by Cleo Mango, who started the founder of the Black Men's Exchange. And we are seeing that some men, and there's a cultural, the reason why I use this is not just to educate you about the term, but what I believe is the philosophy or the community understanding behind it. Many African American men do not relate to the term gay because they see it as the white male community, and it's a community they often do not relate to. As I mentioned before, there's racism within the gay community also, just like there is in the larger heterosexual community. So there might be some individuals that are not comfortable identifying or don't see themselves as being gay or bisexual or a woman being lesbian, but they do use the term same gender loving. similar to the MSM, okay? So we've seen, again, not all, but some, so I want to be inclusive of that and respectful of that. I want to go back now to that homophobia and heterosexism. Homophobia is when we give the message, well, homophobia is based on fear. Fear of same-sex and or same-sex attraction and or same-sex activity. Heterosexism kind of moves it to a broader range. Many people see homophobia as something that we deal with on an individual level. I think it also is on an external level also. Because there are many of us that I have resolved my own issues about being an out gay man. I'm very comfortable. I mean, it's on my business card. You know what I mean? It's like I'm the health educator for an LGBT healthcare program at Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. So I'm pretty comfortable being out and gay, but I still have to deal sometimes with homophobic attitudes, behaviors, and then also institutional heterosexism that takes place. Sometimes it's harder for me to get some of my information out there than what I see some of my non-gay counterparts able to do within our system. You know, I might put out something and somebody might screen or edit it or cut it apart, and somebody else just has something posted or, you know, sent out. Their memo goes from site to site without any kind of repercussions or editing. Not that I'm saying out anything outrageous, and that's heterosexism. Or now it's not happening for me. I don't want it. My university is very supportive, but I have colleagues that talk about, I can't send a letter to someone talking about the issues we're doing without my director or supervisor reading it first to make sure I'm not saying anything that might put our agency or our funding at jeopardy. And I understand as a manager that might be part of it, but if it's really based on homophobia or heterosexism, it's just like we just don't want people to think that this is really what we're... And what I often hear from some individuals, we're very happy to include gay people, we just don't want to be known as a gay organization. That's homophobic. That's heterosexist. What do you mean being known as a gay? You're an organization. You're an HIV service organization. You're reaching out to everyone, but you're still concerned about whether or not other people might see something in your office that is inclusive for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender individuals. So we look at homophobia moving into acceptance on a continuum that is culturally influenced. The family of origin can also have an impact on how LGBT individuals identify themselves, and if the family is unaccepting or negative, it can have very devastating effect for individuals. Sometimes individuals are, the abuse that they sustain on the streets is nothing compared to the abuse they sustain in their home. Sometimes the reason why they're on the streets is because they no longer have a safe home to go, and they're not runaway kids, they're throwaway kids. They've been already thrown out of the house. So let me talk about violence prevention. I have 15 more minutes. And I'm just going to give you, again, kind of like some nutshells, some things to think about, some things to take home with you. There's a lot more information in the slide. Okay. Many times when we talk about violence prevention, what we often do is we respond after an incident. That is not preventing an incident from occurring. That is responding to an incident. That is treatment. What do we do before is what we should consider as part of our prevention model. Now, we talk about prevention in so many different areas, and I think when it comes to violence, it's difficult for some people to grasp, well, how can we actually then move to a violence prevention model? One of the things we encourage is what we can do to increase protective factors and decrease risk factors. So we have to take a very comprehensive approach. This is the public health model where we talk about defining the problem, identifying those risk and protective factors, and then developing strategies, tested strategies in order to increase them or decrease them, and then assure widespread adoption. We come up with some really great ideas in our office, and when we put them into the street, they don't go anywhere. So we have to try, we have to listen. And I know I don't want to be preaching to the choir here, because many of you know this, that's what you're doing, and that's why we have a conference like Keeping It Real, because we are talking about the street outreach person. We know what's been effective and what has been working. But again, it's supported by the public health model. We need to test that. We need to plan, do, study, and act. Plan the activity, study the activity, do the activity, plan, do, study, and act. Okay. Many times when we talk about interventions, what we consider we're doing is not always primary. Primary is our first choice of what we can do to increase those protective factors and decrease those risk factors. We all can do secondary to tertiary. Just to give you another model to work from, this is the sociological model. And again, you have this slide information. We just kind of move through that. Working with the individual as far as what their own individual risk and protective factors are. And then within their relationships, understanding the close relationships that they have. Okay? So in this aspect, having mentoring programs, things that can help to foster better problem-solving skills, better communication skills, promote healthy relationships can also be beneficial as far as preventing violence. But this is before it occurs, not after it occurs. Exploring the third level, which is our community, what we're doing within our neighborhoods, within our school, our workplaces, to see that other people have an understanding that we work collectively to prevent violence. Which brings us into the larger what we can do as a society to discourage violence from becoming a wider spread epidemic. And again, just keep thinking about increasing protective factors, decreasing risk factors. We need to do this with collaboration from others. We can't do it alone. One single agency is not going to be successful. But when you partner with others, when you invite the church leaders to come in and meet you and talk with you, when there is an incident that occurs, to do widespread outreach within the community and let them know that this is not acceptable in your community, that you're not going to tolerate this, or you're going to work to prevent it. Sometimes, mistakenly, what is often perceived to be done is that conflict resolution. Let's get the two parties together so they can resolve their differences. That may work in a corporate situation, that may work in a clinical situation. When it comes to bullying, when it comes to victims and perpetrators, they're not going to sit down and reason things out. You know why? Because you're just going to empower the bully. You're going to give them more. You're putting the victim in a more vulnerable spot. You're also sending the message to the victim that if they handled the situation differently, then perhaps this wouldn't have happened. A good friend of mine, her 21-year-old son, was just out on a Saturday, just happened like 2 weeks ago. Wonderful young man, college student, was in a convenience store with 3 of his friends. They were watching a movie, they were ordering some sandwiches. 2 older men came in, older, not, in their 30s, late 20s, came in. They were drunk, they were under the influence. They started joking around. The person making the sandwich started joking with them. The young man that I know joked with them also. It was all done. Nobody was saying anything abusive. I have to go on what I know from this person. I can't imagine him deliberately trying to antagonize someone who is intoxicated. Both his parents are CADCs. So he's grown up in a house where he knows about the disease of alcoholism. He wouldn't make fun of someone for being drunk. They were just making comments, group of people in a neighborhood store. He left the store. The 2 guys jumped him, stomped him, steel-toe boots, crushed his face. He just went through 4 hours of plastic surgery on Monday. When the police responded, the policewoman said to the mother of the victim, my friend, well, what did your son do that caused them to, what did he say to cause them to do this? So victim blaming can take many different dimensions. I just kind of share that story with you because it's very recent in my own life. So a great website to go to is from HRSA, which is Stop Bullying Now. It talks about the positive messages we need to give to youth who have been victimized, what we can do to help them, and also what we can do to recognize what bullies need to do in order to stop their behavior, or when we see signs of aggression in children, and how we can diminish that. Bystander behavior. As I said, remember the bullies need an audience? So even if it's taking place on a street corner, there is somebody that needs to watch, that is watching that, and that's what's fortifying for the bully, their behavior. What we can start teaching people, because many times, and this might be sometimes even brought into your program if you're doing groups, people might say, I saw it, it was going down, and I didn't do anything. The reason why I didn't do anything is many times the bystander doesn't feel safe. They might not participate. They don't know what to do. So we can teach individuals how to increase bystander behavior as a protective factors. We know that if nobody else is acting, it's hard to go against the crowd. You're also taking a risk. You may feel embarrassed. They think someone else in the group is either more qualified or better prepared to help. Sometimes they think the situation doesn't call for anything, okay? And they're all taking cues from others around them. Well, they're not doing anything, so I'm not, they think it's okay, they think it's cool, they're laughing, I'm not doing anything, they're not doing anything. But internally they're saying, but something about this isn't right. Some of the behaviors we teach people as far as being responsible, sometimes just positioning yourself. If someone is being targeted and is being verbally harassed, we teach this to elementary school children, so think about how it can be adapted to individuals too, particularly coming into our centers, okay? Just allying yourself, just moving yourself. I give a scenario, there's a victim, there's a bully, and there's 5 people standing around them. So that bully gets closer to the victim, and the other 5 people start moving in, and they're all kind of standing behind him. He says a few things, the victim might say or do things, gets a little bit more escalating, somebody starts touching, pushing, and sometimes even the perpetrators will kind of like circle around the victim. But what if one of them stood next to the victim? Didn't have to say anything, but just went shoulder to shoulder with the victim and turned to the bully and said, dude, what's going on? Like, what are we doing this for? Don't we have something better to do today? Okay? He doesn't have to stand in front. He's not taking the punch for somebody. He's just empowering that individual to not feel alone and not feel isolated. And there's other ways. It can be there's other things that we can encourage. I just use that as one example. Call police, talk to somebody in authority. But again, if the police aren't, we have to work with our law enforcement also. And in Jersey, that's what we do. We give training around violence prevention to all our law enforcement officers. Telling someone else, ask for help. Asking the individual, do you need help? Just saying to someone, maybe some people coming into a group are talking about what it was like, something happened over the weekend on the street or something like that, and just saying to them, well, why didn't you go, did you think about, or could you maybe next time go to that person and say, hey, why don't you take a walk with me? You and I don't need to be hanging here. This scene isn't good. I'm not really comfortable. Why don't you and I leave? Let's go somewhere else. You know what I mean? Because of that victim by themselves, if they try to withdraw, they're often going to be followed and antagonized. But if someone else is going with them and saying, come on, you and I take a walk. Let's go to the other corner. There's someplace else. We don't have to stand here. We can go stand somewhere else. We're not going to engage in that power struggle that's being exhibited. Asking the person if they're okay. Asking them if they need help. Assessing your safety, be with others, care for the victim. Remember, personal safety is, of course, the #1 priority. Some resources I have for you is the Trevor Project. You can go online. They also have a helpline that you can call. Daniel Radcliffe is one of their newer spokesperson. That's the Harry Potter, who's now a Broadway star. There are risk factors for suicide in the general population. Most of you are probably familiar with these. And again, I'm just going to refer you to the handouts. I don't have time to go over each of them. But there are some that are unique to LGBT youth, particularly their nonconformity around their gender, around their expression, around coming out issues. There's warning signs for suicide that we should be familiar with. This is what we can help other people to see if a friend of theirs, if someone in their group or someone they know on the street is talking about suicide, what they can do. They're not responsible for their friend's decision, but it's why care, how you can help someone. You can connect, you can accept and listen to the person's feelings, you can respond if they have a plan and tell someone you trust. We can empower that individual to get help and call. This is a card that is put up by the Trevor. You can actually get these little palm cards. They'll send them to you for free. The other acronym that's used is the ACT, that's acknowledge, care, and tell. We want to promote resilience in all our youth, but particularly with our LGBT youth. And this comes from their engagement with the family, the community, and the schools. If they're not getting it in the family, then we can maybe help the family to become better understanding about the emerging sexual identity. But if not, then we can still provide support in our community through our programs. Helping them to develop coping mechanisms, positive media representation. Going back to our suicide prevention, it's never too late. This is a prevention message on the Golden Gate Bridge. There is help to make the call. There actually is a phone on the next post. It's not like you just have to go back to your car to make the call. But it's just, again, we don't know when that prevention message, there's never too late to make a change. There are other health risks that we see for many LGBT youth. However, the risk of HIV/AIDS, substance abuse, depression, and suicide are the top 3 risks continually that we see in our young people. In screening for safety with LGBT youth, we use this acronym HEADS. You want to ask about their home. What is it like in the home? Are you getting support? Are you being discouraged? Are you being harassed or intimidated? How about your education? Not only are you in school, what are your plans for school? Do you plan on continuing your education? Many kids can survive if they keep their educational goals focused. I heard other presenters talk about that also. Activities, what type of activities are they involved in? And then ask specifically on the 3 Ds, the drugs, the depression, and the diet. Because nutrition and inadequate nutrition can also be a part of it. Thank you, after a minute. And then ask about safety and ask about sexuality. 2 different areas of concern. It's not our place to tell someone that they need to come out, whether they should come out or how they come out. We do help people to see that sometimes being out is going to have consequences, and if they're prepared to handle those consequences, we can help them if they make that decision to come out. We don't tell people they have to be out. One of the things I often hear, particularly say if a treatment program uses a 12-step model, they talk about being as sick as your secrets. So it kind of forces the individual who's dealing with their sexual identity to be open about it in a group situation. Now, if the group situation is not very positive, not very nurturing, not very empathetic, then I don't know if I would even want to sit in a group and tell my peers that I'm gay based on some of the things I hear in a group and the lack of support that I see facilitators utilize when someone does express it and the other group members tend to abuse it. So we have to make sure that our treatment is safe and sensitive if people do choose to disclose. If there are incidents, this is what we teach in this is what I recommend for the school system. I think it also can apply within your agencies to make sure everything is documented. I'm not talking about just in your case documentation, but if there is an incident of violence that occurs, particularly connected to individuals who receive services in your program, or if it actually happens in your program or in your neighborhood, to ask these 6 whys: who was involved, what happened, where it happened, when it happened, who was it reported to, and if there were any witnesses. You may not be doing the investigation, but that's important information to have, particularly if we see violence perpetrating or continuing in a particular. Got 1 more minute. Okay. Educate yourself, educate others about making schools safer for others. These are some of the signs that are used in the school system, but it can also be used in agencies, particularly this is a safe space for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender students and their allies. This one here says, I'm willing to talk about. You see all these different things: rapes, anger, dreams, weight, suicide, family, race, religion, homelessness, and also says sexual orientation, transgender, self-esteem, dating, gay. So we want to create environments that are very supportive and inclusive of LGBT individuals, creating safe zones for individuals. This is just assortment of sides that pictures that can be used. We want families to learn how to increase behaviors, decrease some of the behaviors that actually increase the increased likelihood of suicide. This comes from the research of Dr. Caitlin Ryan from the Family Acceptance Project. Her book is wonderful. I'm just going to share it at the end here. Certain family behaviors are actually going to reduce the risk of suicide. The more family can accept the individual, the least likely the individual is going to act on their suicidal attempt. And I was just given the timeout, so my last 2 slides. We talked about runaway youth. We talked about kids that are homeless. The important is not to make any assumptions about working with our clients. Don't assume their sexual behavior based on their sexual identity. Don't assume that it hasn't changed. And don't assume transgender clients are gay, bisexual, or lesbian. That's Dr. Futterman's book. And these are the resources. You have them on your site. And that's my contact information. Okay? Be happy to hear from you. We do have a full 6-hour training that we can offer. We also have modulars that come down. We can break it into a 2-hour, 4-hour, 6-hour if that's something that you're looking for. If you'd like to ask us about contracting for some additional training in your area. And if you just have a question, if you're looking for some kind of a consult or support, just feel free to email me at this address, and my card is up here on this front table. Any questions? I know we're breaking, so I'm over. You're done. Do you have any questions to wrap up? Comments, questions, concerns? All right, well, thank you very much.
I have the stickers.